Evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this bank holiday Monday, the 27th of May. My name is Brian Liddy, and this evening I'm joined by the retired MSP and frequent contributor to the show and supporter, Maureen Watt. Maureen, thank you for giving up a big chunk of your bank holiday weekend for us.
Oh, that's no problem. Not at all. It's not very much of a bank holiday, I don't think, in this part of the world.
Okay, just, just taking it easy then. So we'll start the show again, sadly, with our routine Ukraine update, and today is day 824. Death toll from Russian strikes on a hardware store in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv rose to 16 on Sunday, authorities said, as rescuers continued to search the charred debris for bodies. The dead included a 12-year-old girl, and another 43 people were wounded, and several people were listed as missing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky released a desperate video plea calling on world leaders to attend a peace summit in Switzerland. Zelensky appealed in particular to President Biden and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping to attend the summit, which is due to start on the 15th of June. Please show your leadership in advancing the peace, the real peace, and not just a pause between the strikes, said Zelensky in English. Biden has not yet confirmed his attendance, and it is not known whether China will attend. Negotiations are ongoing over Beijing's participation, Zelensky's aide Mikhailo Podolyak said in an interview last week. Zelensky is set to meet Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in Madrid on Monday, as well as King Philippe VI. Earlier this month, Zelensky postponed all upcoming foreign visits, including the trip to Spain that had been scheduled for the 17th of May after Russia launched an offensive in the north of the Kharkiv region. Ukrainian prosecutors said Russian shelling on Sunday killed 3 people in 3 different towns in the Donetsk region, another focal point for the Russian military's onslaught. Prosecutors in Donetsk region, which Russia has annexed, though it does not control all of its territory, said civilians had died in the Seversk in the north of the region and farther south in Krasnorivka and Chazivyar. Russian forces have also taken over the village of Berestov in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region, according to Russia's defense ministry. The report could not be verified. 1 person was killed and 3 were wounded in a Ukrainian drone attack on Russia's Oryol region in the early hours of Monday, according to the regional governor, Andrei Klitschov. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, reiterated her opposition to weapons supplied to Ukraine being used on Russian soil after NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg told The Economist the restrictions should be lifted. So, apologies for any mispronunciations that I made in today's update there. Maureen, is there anything that you'd like to add to the update?
Um, well, it's good that Zelensky is, feeling confident enough to leave the country and speak to world leaders in order to get the support that he needs. Um, I was just thinking while you were giving that update, Brian, what would a real peace in, as opposed to just a pause in the war, what would a real peace look like in Ukraine? And we know that over the past few days, Putin has said that he would negotiate a peace on the existing boundaries, i.e., those parts of Ukraine that he's already managed to take and got a presence. And I hope that that would be not agreeable to Ukraine, and it's obviously ultimately Ukraine's decision, because Putin cannot be trusted on that. I mean, he is a warmongerer. Would he just laugh at the West, Ukraine and the West, and continue thereafter, or would he go and invade another country? So it's very difficult to know, and it still looks as if any sort of peace or even ceasefire is a long way off.
Yes, I think I've said on here before that it's quite depressing to think that this isn't going to be the last daily update. I just wonder how high the number is going to be in terms
Mm.
of updates, daily updates. Yeah. So and now we move on to the latest from Israel and Gaza. Gaza's health ministry has said that at least 35,984 Palestinian people have been killed and 80,643 injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October. Israeli airstrikes on the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah killed at least 45 Palestinians and injured dozens of others, according to officials. Most of the people who were killed were women, children, or elderly. The attack took place in the Tal al Sultan neighbourhood, where thousands were sheltering after Israeli forces began a ground offensive in the east of Rafah over 2 weeks ago. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said he was horrified by news coming out of Rafah on Israeli strikes killing dozens of displaced persons, including small children. He said, "There is no safe place in Gaza. These attacks must stop immediately. ICJ orders and IHL must be respected by all parties." Italy said Israeli attacks on Palestinian civilians in Gaza were no longer justifiable in one of the strongest criticisms Rome has made so far against Israel's war on the enclave. French President Emmanuel Macron joined the wave of condemnation, saying that he was outraged by the Israeli airstrikes on the camp, tweeting, "These operations must stop. There are no safe areas in Rafah for Palestinian citizens. I call for full respect for international law and an immediate ceasefire." The United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, has said that reports of attacks on families seeking shelter in Rafah in southern Gaza were horrifying. Israel's army had said overnight that its aircraft had struck a Hamas compound in Rafah, killing Yassin Rabia and Khalid Nagar. Israel's top military prosecutor called the airstrike very grave and said an investigation was underway. Benjamin Netanyahu described the deadly Israeli airstrike in Rafah as a tragic mishap. Amnesty International has urged the International Criminal Court to investigate as war crimes 3 recent Israeli strikes that killed 44 Palestinian civilians, including 32 children. Those attacks were on the Al-Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza on the 16th of April and 2 on Rafah in southern Gaza on the 19th and the 20th of April. Egypt's military spokesperson said that authorities are carrying out an investigation into a shooting near the Rafah border that led to the killing of one person. The Israeli military said earlier that it was investigating reports of an exchange of fire between Israeli and Egyptian soldiers close to the Rafah border crossing with Gaza. Relations between the EU and Israel took a nosedive on the eve of the diplomatic recognition of a Palestinian state by EU members Ireland and Spain. Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, told Spain that its consulate in Jerusalem will not be allowed to help Palestinians. EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, threw his weight to support the International Criminal Court, whose prosecutor is seeking an arrest warrant against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and others, including the leader of Hamas. The International Criminal Court should investigate as war crimes 3 Israeli airstrikes that killed 44 Palestinian civilians, including 32 children, in the Gaza Strip last month, Amnesty International has said. Strikes, one on Al-Maghazi on the 16th of April and 2 on the southern city of Rafah on the 19th and 20th of April 2024, also injured at least 20 civilians, the organisation said. Israel says it is investigating the deaths of Palestinians captured during the war in Gaza, as well as a military-run detention camp where a human rights group has alleged abuse of inmates, the Armed Forces Chief Prosecutor said. So, Maureen, I think most of today's Gaza update was to do with the appalling airstrike that hit tents, housing displaced people. And Maybe I should just let you comment first before I start to ask you about that. Is there anything in today's update that caught your eye?
Well, it's just continues to be absolutely tragic in Gaza. And, the way that Israel expects hundreds of thousands of people to move at a whim while they continue what I think is just the erasure of Gaza and the obliteration of any life and infrastructure in Gaza continues. I mean, not everybody can move as quickly as the Israelis want them to, and therefore we've had these terrible atrocities in Rafah. And every time this happens, the Israelis say, "Oh, we will have an investigation," but nothing happens or anything meaningful happens. Some people might get a little tap on the wrist, but that's basically it. And they keep saying, "Oh, it's a tragic mishap." They don't really care. And as I've said many times on Broadcasting Scotland, my view is, as I say, they just want to obliterate Gaza with no idea of what has to happen afterwards. Maybe they expect the international community to come in and do something. I don't know. But just like Ukraine, what does peace look like? And it's difficult to contemplate or to even think about what it might look like. I suppose, in a way, because there are so many players in the Middle East trying to find a solution in between Gaza and the Palestinians, between the Israelis and the Palestinians, or the Israeli government and the Palestinians, that peace might be a bit more tangible there, but it's very difficult to know.
Thank you, Maureen. There's a couple of things I'd like to ask you. I mean, that comment by Netanyahu that this was a tragic mishap, I don't really, I'm struggling to understand. So what's the difference between this this mishap and what's been going on in Palestine since the October 7th attacks? I mean, are they also tragic mishaps? And can we take Netanyahu seriously when he calls it that?
No, it's just a smokescreen. I suppose he has to say something when asked by reporters. But as I said, when there have been these tragic mishaps in the past, nobody's really been made responsible for them or disciplined in any way, that meaningful way that I can remember. And what happens to the investigations? Do they just hope that people will have moved on by then? I mean, and that's, I suppose, when you think about it, where the international community and war crimes comes in, because there has to be detailed recording of these incidents, so that when Netanyahu is taken to a tribunal, a war tribunal, that these sorts of tragic mishaps are used as evidence.
And there was also mention in tonight's report of Ireland and Spain's recognition of Palestine as an official state. Do you think it's fair to say that people talk about a two-state solution? So if that is ever going to become a reality, then Palestine is going to have to be recognised as a state, isn't it? And I'm guessing that, do you agree that the UK government is probably going to be one of the last countries to actually sign up and recognise that?
That's an interesting question. It'll be interesting to see if we have a new incoming government, what the state, what a Labour government will do. Will they have been sufficiently chastised when they don't win seats that they thought they might, where there is a large Muslim population, and not just that, where there are thousands of supporters of Palestine who have already completely disillusioned with the Labour Party, whether they will be a bit chastened, or do they feel that they have got to continue the present policy of the current Conservative government just to look strong and showing continuity. Very interesting to see. Perhaps some journalists will ask them on the campaign trail.
Yes, and then we're going to be talking a lot about the general election updates, and so I can't help but think, would it be any different with once Starmer becomes Prime Minister? And so that's another question. Maureen, I'm just going to say I was struck by something that I saw when I was reading up on preparing for today's show. It says doctors returning home from Gaza said, "Nothing justifies what we have witnessed here." The doctors Mohammed Tahir and Omar El Taji thought they were mentally prepared to help treat people in Rafah, but what they and other foreign volunteers faced was beyond anything they could have imagined. So I'm just thinking about that psychological burden. Hearing broadcast in Scotland yesterday on the Full Scot, and again on Friday evening for the Scotland at 7 show, there's been a lot of talk about journalists and what they have to bear when they're reporting on these atrocities. So I suppose we should also include medical staff and volunteers. I don't know if there's anything worth saying about that.
Yeah, some of the best reporting from Gaza has been the video diaries that medics have made during their stay in Gaza. And I have huge respect for medics who take time out from their normal job to work in places like Gaza. I mean, they worked in Gaza, many of them, pre the war, and have not let the war put them off in doing a stint in Gaza. And I think organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières play a huge role in helping in conflict situations. But it whether they get and take the sort of therapy that they need, rather than develop PTSD, is really interesting, and I sincerely hope they do.
Thank you, Maureen. So I should probably say to the viewers at home that as it's a bank holiday weekend, there's not really very much news today. There's been a dearth of press releases. So we thought we would just concentrate on general election updates. Just in general, there's going to be a total of 57 seats in Scotland, and that's down from the current 59 due to boundaries being changed. So maybe let's start with Keir Starmer made a big speech today, where he actually no, maybe got something a bit more interesting. So there's reports that Labour have given up on winning many seats across Scotland, and the SNP have said after Labour activists were told to travel literally hundreds of miles rather than campaigning in their local area. Apparently the Labour Party's official website has a tool which recommends campaigning areas for activists to target based on their postcode. But folk in some constituencies, generally ones which are seen as a race between the Tories and the SNP, or a race between the SNP and the Lib Dems, are being told to travel vast distances in Scotland to campaign in areas where Labour have a better chance of winning. So, for example, Labour activists in Lerwick it's being suggested that they should campaign 255 miles away in the Western Isles. Or alternatively, they might want to go to Dunfermline and Dollar constituency, or Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, both of which are even further away. Activists in Aberdeen South, the Stephen Flynn's constituency, were asked to campaign for Labour 90 miles away in Dunfermline and Dollar. Activists in Thurso were told to travel 130 miles to campaign in the Western Isles, as were activists in Portree and in Kirkwall. Ailey activists were told to campaign in Glasgow North, while Mull activists were told to go to West Dunbartonshire. Pitlochry activists got allocated Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West, and so it goes on. I'm just wondering, do you think, is this another example of how Starmer's Labour Party just doesn't really get Scotland? And it doesn't look like Anas Sarwar has had a chance to alert him to how ridiculous these plans sound. And I don't know, would Starmer pay any heed to Anas Sarwar even if he did flag this up?
Well, it's clearly not been drawn up by somebody in Labour HQ in Scotland, has it? Or maybe it has. You know, the Labour Party are used to. There's two issues here. One is that clearly there are vast swathes of parliamentary constituencies where Labour hasn't got a chance at all and is not even making a fist at it, that it's encouraging activists to go to other constituencies at this stage. So they've been written off from day one. Secondly, we know from past experience that Labour bus people around the country, the UK, very frequently. We know, for example, that when the Hamilton and Rutherglen by-election was just a possibility, there were busloads of people from all over the UK coming into Hamilton and Rutherglen, Hamilton West and Rutherglen, to canvass for the Labour Party. So this is not unusual, but whether people are actually going to do that, I can't see people moving out, for example, from Orkney or Shetland to go to the Western Isles. Maybe they'll come down to the mainland one weekend or something like that, but it's not going to happen in the way that the Labour Party want. And it'll be interesting to see during an election time where you have got a certain loyalty to your own constituency, the one you live in or the one you've worked in, to work hard there. So whether people will move in the Labour Party will be very interesting to see.
Yep, thank you, Maureen. And you mentioned the Rutherglen and Hamilton West, where Labour managed to double their MPs in Westminster overnight. It went up from one MP to two. It was Michael Shanks, I think, that won that one. I think the next item that caught my eye, I was Stephen Flynn branded the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar as a sleek salesman after Sarwar admitted his family firm does not pay workers the real living wage. Flynn also said of Sarwar, and when push comes to shove, it really is less change and more chancer. Sarwar was forced to concede that his family business does not pay salaries that match the level Labour claims will lift people out of poverty as part of the New Deal for working people. Sarwar relinquished his own shares in the family business that called United Wholesale Scotland in 2017, but his wife still benefits, receiving dividends of around £40,000 a year. And in 2017, Sarwar claimed that he'd received assurances from the company that it wants to transition to a real living wage for all employees. The real living wage at the moment in the UK is £11.44 an hour for people aged 21 and over. And the real living wage is £13.15 in London, £12 an hour in the rest of the country. And to pay that's voluntary for employers. So I don't know. I mean, we're told that Rishi Sunak's not very good at politics, but do you think, does this illustrate that neither is Anas Sarwar? Surely he should have gone to his family, pleaded with his family to at least pay the living wage, and if not, preferably even a wee bit more, so that this wouldn't come and bite him on the bum. Could it be that his family just don't like him, or is it just pure naked greed?
Well, I mean, first of all, USDA has come in with all guns blazing to say that that United Wholesale Scotland the living wage. I'm not sure whether they pay the real living wage, but Sarwar fell into this one very quickly, didn't he? I mean, given that's been an issue in previous elections, even although he hasn't reputedly got any say in the business anymore, surely through his wife, he would have made sure that this was an issue that was put to bed in previous times and not waited to now. And it does show um, that he misstepped on this. He should have been able to say right away that the company, since he was asked about this in previous elections, has moved and is now at the living wage, or even if I was in his position, I would make sure it was the real living wage, because he was well caught out on this before. But it also shows that I think opposition parties need to be a bit circumspect before they follow the journalists and immediately give a quote on this. I would want to make sure of my facts before I gave a response. So maybe find from another source whether this was the case or not. So I think all parties can be too quick to respond to something when a journalist puts their pen and paper or microphone under their noses, and sometimes they don't come up smelling roses.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. And Keir Starmer gave an important, I don't know if it's important, but Keir Starmer gave a big speech today on the campaign trail. He said that as Prime Minister, he would tell the Israeli Prime Minister to stop the Rafah offensive. He also refused to rule out raising tuition fees. He also refused to commit to abolishing the photo ID card that's now needed before their general election. He also ruled out allowing EU nationals to vote in general elections. And he said he respected the decision of some parents to send their children to private schools. He also, maybe not in the speech, but he also today said that he would describe himself as a socialist, not just that, but a progressive socialist. But when he was asked to define that, he just said it was about putting the country first, or putting the country before party. I'm just wondering, Maureen, do you think that whether Starmer is a socialist or not, does it show in his policies?
Well, either his definition and my definition of a socialist, one of us has got it completely wrong, or Keir Stammer's trying to be all people. What's the word? Everything to all men, or all people, because you can't be. To me, socialism is not putting country first before party. It's got nothing to do with that. It's about your policies in all sorts of areas, but particularly in social justice and equality. And that didn't come across today. I mean, he could have had, in order to distinguish himself and his party from the Tories, he could have got easy wins today in saying he would scrap the photo ID, for example, if he wins the election, and if people are paying taxes here, like EU nationals, to give them the vote. So it seems to me that he's sticking so closely to the Tory party that anybody who is wondering how they're going to vote would really have to think, well, do I want change for change's sake when it's not really going to mean anything? And that's particularly true in England. So the fact that he had to stand up today, as I understand it, although I haven't read his speech or seen any of it, and ensure that the electorate knew that he was for sort of king and country, and the safety of the nation was going to be first and foremost. I mean, for any political party not to just take that as a given seems to me that he's kind of very jittery. And, it's almost as we know that this is his election to lose, and, he just needs to make a few faux pas, and that could be the difference between a new Labour government and 5 more years of a disastrous Tory government.
Thank you, Maureen. And I can't help but be tempted to compare Starmer to Jeremy Corbyn, who I think most people would say is pretty much the definition of a socialist. I remember when he was leader of the Labour Party and there was a general election coming up, and people loved his manifesto. But when I read through it, it read very much like an SNP manifesto. And actually, a lot of the things that Corbyn wanted to bring in were things that were already happening in Scotland. And of course, Corbyn, this general election, he's standing as an independent, and it looks like he's going to actually defeat Labour. And the word on the street says that he's going to win. Labour's going to be defeated in Islington, simply because he's been the MP there so long and people still like him. So does that make what do you have to say to that kind of comparison?
Um, well, normally when people leave their party and become independents, it's very difficult to get elected. So if he gets elected, that'll be a real coup for Jeremy Corbyn and a slap in the face for the Labour Party. Um, and of course, I think we've still got to hear what's going to happen to Diane Abbott, have we not? That might be another case of Labour MP who's been there for years, standing as an independent. So, yes, as you said, much of Jeremy Corbyn's views and speeches and manifesto are things that we're already doing in Scotland, and that's social democratic. I wouldn't say it's even socialist. So these terms are bandied about by not really knowing exactly what they mean in terms of politics and the study of politics.
Thank you, Maureen. And I'm intrigued. What are your thoughts about the fact that Labour are fielding candidates from in Scotland from places like Cambridgeshire?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think they'd learn, wouldn't you, that that's not what happens in today's politics. It was the things that kind of happened in the wartime, and remember Churchill famously stood in Dundee, but I thought that had completely disappeared. I mean, how on earth is it that the Labour Party cannot get candidates themselves? In Scotland, can't get Scottish Labour Party can't get candidates to stand in Scotland. I mean, they still have quite a number of councillors, and often councillors want to step up. How come it is that in what are supposed to be winnable seats for Labour, they're putting in candidates um, from England, and sometimes it's not even people who are Scottish but living in England currently or whatever. It's really, I mean, it's quite a slap in the face to voters, I would say, and I think it's things that the SNP and other parties standing against Labour in seats where this has happened need to highlight that somebody's been parachuted in, as they say.
But why is that the case? I mean, is it that Labour just cannot get enough people in Scotland to stand up and stand as a potential Labour MP?
Well, sometimes if you read into it, it is that somebody's been parachuted in by Labour HQ in London over the wishes of the local Labour Party. And I suspect it'll be kind of Keir Stammer friends and acolytes who haven't won in constituencies in England are being parachuted into Scotland.
Yes, you're right, and I remember now. Michael, that happened in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, didn't it? Michael Shanks was parachuted in, and he wasn't the preferred candidate of the local activists. I seem to remember. So moving on to the Tories, so there are six Tory MPs in Scotland, and I think it's still the case that the SNP are the main challengers in each of those six seats. And then comes the news that the Conservatives are reportedly without candidates in 25% of Scottish seats. So, Maureen, again, I'm just wondering, with your expertise as an MSP, what do you think that means? So I'm guessing that the Conservatives really due to Brexit and the cost of living crisis and the like, and they really are struggling to find people that are willing to stand up underneath a Conservative banner in Scotland.
Well, I think they've simply been caught on the hop. I'm really surprised that they haven't got candidates in 25% of the seats in Scotland. I mean, the SNP have had all 57 candidates in place for quite a number of months now, although we were previously criticised for being not anywhere near that. And now we find that we're the only party with candidates in every seat. Um, as far as the Tories are concerned, I mean, there's quite a number standing down in England, and maybe um, people would prefer to stand, take their chance in England. There are obviously very few seats in Scotland where the Tories are likely to pick up seats, but it does show that, well, it's maybe worrying that, it would appear that many parties are struggling to get candidates. And, you know, the selection process for candidates, or the assessment process, has to be really strict and really rigorous in order to make sure that you don't get candidates who are going to put their foot in it, for want of a better word, during the campaign, never mind if they perchance get elected. But also, I'm sure that the Tories will spend a massive amount of money and other resources, including personnel, in the six seats that they've got. They'll be desperate to retain those. And I'm not sure about what the lie of the land is in the borders, although Alistair Jack's obviously standing down, so that would be a seat that has changed hands quite frequently since the 1970s between the Tories and the SNP. And in the northeast, in the seat that I live in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, it really is a fight here. Andrew Bowie's on the back foot, and there's a lot already of press interest in this seat. In the old, I can't remember what it's called now, in the old Banff and Buchan seat. That's going to be interesting too, because the Tory candidate is in the hospital currently. And Douglas Ross's seat currently, its boundaries have changed massively. And I've not yet had any intel, if you like, from the ground on that one.
Yeah, you mentioned donors to the Tory party there. I've seen reports or articles criticising Labour as well as the Conservative Party for only having a handful of very wealthy donors, which doesn't sound very healthy for democracy. And the last time I looked, I think there were 79 Conservative MPs were standing down, and the latest one to join was Michael Gove. So I don't know, are you surprised to hear that he's no longer going to be on our newspapers and TV screens as an MP?
I was surprised that he's standing down, although there was a quite revelatory article in The Guardian one day. I can't remember if it's Friday or before that, about him, and I wondered if that influenced his judgment in any way. But hey ho, maybe we'll see him in the nightclubs in Aberdeen more often if he's not busy with being an MP and a cabinet secretary for the Tories anymore.
Yes, letting people buy him drinks for him, if I remember rightly. Um, so, so Rishi Sunak has rejected claims that he plans to move to California if he loses the general election. I'm intrigued to find out what you think about why he's decided to call the election so soon. Most people seem to think it was going to be happening in autumn or October. Do you think it really is that he just does not want to be Prime Minister anymore and that he really does want to just move to California?
Well, I think whether he moves to California is a bit of a red herring at the moment. I mean, we don't know whether his kids are settled in school in this country, what his wife's business interests, where they mostly are. So whether he wants to move or not, I don't think really matters. I think, though, that he probably thought, stuff this for a lark or for a game of soldiers. It's just too difficult with a party that's in total disarray, is being buffeted more, I would say, from its right wing and reform than from Labour, who've been a pretty awful opposition, really. Um, and he thought, well, there are a few economic indicators that are a bit better. I'll just go. I'd rather campaign in the sunshine than in the dark, dull nights. Maybe I don't know, um, but it's certainly taken lots of people on the hop, including many of his own backbenchers and ministers even, who thought they had a few more months to of salaries and a few more months to find other jobs if they were going to leave, and as possibilities if they're going to lose their seats. So there are a few. Well, I think there'd be a lot of pretty disgruntled Tory MPs at the moment, scrambling round to get a campaign that's probably not been done and taken down and dusted off the shelves yet.
Thanks, Maureen. And there's been one big announcement that surprised me. It's been made so close to the announcement that there's going to be a general election on the 4th of July, and that's that national service, 18-year-olds um, refused to say what sanctions 18-year-olds might face if they refuse to take part in his planned compulsory national service. Douglas Ross was on the campaign trail today, and he defended. Apparently, it's going to be paid for by rerouting EU replacement funds, and the rest of the money is going to come from. Just trying to scan my notes. Somewhere at £1.5 billion will come from the Shared Prosperity Fund, and the other £1 billion would be paid for through a crackdown on tax avoidance and evasion. I wonder if Michelle Mone would fit into that category. Douglas Ross has defended that, and that money should come from EU replacement funds. The SNP have said that they'll oppose the National Service Plan, branded it completely out of touch with families and young people in Scotland. Labour have said that national conscription could cost billions and is only needed because the Tories hollowed out the armed forces to their smallest size since Napoleon. My question to you is, how can Douglas Ross justify rerouting EU funding when most of his constituents voted to remain?
This levelling up fund, which is one of the funds, or is it the fund that replaces funds from the EU, is being used for a heck of a lot of things. I mean, it's only a tiny percentage of what we used to get from the EU, a tiny percentage in replacement for the massive funds that Scotland benefited from the EU, and to see some more of it being diverted into something like 18-year-olds being asked to do national service. I mean, who on earth thought this one up? I mean, what are they thinking of other than, as I said already, I think, trying to appease some of the hard right folk still in the Tory party, and maybe get some who are thinking of voting or are already voting, supporting reform, back into the Tory fold. I cannot imagine anybody who's got any link or idea of how young people are thinking at the moment think that this is a great idea. I mean, what young people are involved in is campaigning against wars and climate change, and thinking about what they can do in order to contribute to society. And I mean, you'd think there was some big problem with young people today. They are more rounded, certainly here in Scotland, more rounded, more confident and outgoing than any generation previously because of the way that they receive their education in Scotland through curriculum for excellence. And 95%, I think, of them are um, currently going into positive destinations after they leave school, whether that's directly into a job, directly into an apprenticeship, or onto further education, or even, although they're not counted, into self-employment. So, um, you know, why are you using a sledgehammer to crack a nut that's not even there? And who they think it will appeal to. I mean, I wouldn't like to see, although I haven't got any in that age group, any children of mine or grandchildren having to do national service, especially in the current situation. And if we're going to increase defence spending to 2.5%, then perhaps they need to relook at as you've said, instead of hollowing out our armed forces, recruiting and upping the levels of highly trained um, people in the regular army and other forces.
And I think I should probably mention that as part of that national service, you don't have to go into the military. I think you can work as a volunteer in the community. Maureen, I'm just conscious that there's just so many updates and timelines, about the general election updates. And before we move on to the Lib Dems, is there anything that's caught your eye about either the Tories or Labour that I haven't mentioned that you'd like to bring into the show tonight?
Well, just to follow on from what you said about people can do voluntary work. I mean, I'm quite au fait with that because many moons ago, I had a boyfriend who was a German, because I went to Germany to because I can speak the language. Um, I had a German boyfriend who was a conscientious objector and he was from the north of Germany, worked in Stuttgart in the south in a home for um, children and young people with physical and mental disabilities. And that's pretty tough as well. It's not as easy as you can make out. So I think, if the Tories are serious about this policy, would need to put flesh on the bones of what doing voluntary work in the community would mean. Because surely, if it's to be an alternative, then it has to be something pretty meaningful, um, rather than just talk about it. Because charities would have to gear up to be able to make the meaningful work for people working in the community. So there's lots of flesh to be put on the bones of this. And if journalists had any sense, they would actually concentrate on trying to find out what exactly it means and how far developed this policy is. In terms of other things, there hasn't really been anything that I can think off the top of my head that struck me as really silly from the other parties at the moment. But then I honestly haven't been paying that much attention this early on. It's going to be a long 4 weeks or 6 weeks till the 4th of July.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I just wondered, I didn't want you to leave with like burning, something that you really wanted to say.
I'll make a
So,
list, Brian. I'll make a list so that if and when I come back on during the next 6 weeks, I've got something to talk about in relation to that.
okay, and check it twice. So, Ed Davey, for the Lib Dems, Ed Davey was campaigning in North Queensferry today, targeting East Dunbartonshire, which reminds me of, always, he said he's going to take seats from the SNP at this general election, which the first thing that came to mind when he said that was Joe Swinson, who lost East Dunbartonshire in 2019 to the SNP. So what do you think the Lib Dems' chances are in Scotland this time around?
Um, yes, I was interested. I saw they were doing a photo op at the same place as the SNP met in 2015 when they got so many seats. Was it? It was. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like it was 56. It was 56. That's right. It was the 56, and there were only I think three others or what something like that. Um, yeah, it's. And I thought, oh golly, remember when we had all these 56 seats, of whom my son was one of them. But North Queensferry, where the photo op is there nothing in East Dunbartonshire where they could have had a photo op? I cannot see. I can't see the the Lib Dems making many gains in Scotland. I mean, they got only four seats in the Scottish Parliament, and um, they currently hold, is it three or four in Westminster, Orkney and Shetland, the Caithness one, East Fife, and Christine Jardine in Edinburgh West. Are they going to? They might hold on to those, but are they going to gain any? I doubt very much. And if they concentrate their resources in trying to win in Dunbartonshire, then good luck to them. But I can't see them making many gains. They're in both parliaments. They're pretty much a complete irrelevance to Scotland.
Thanks, Maureen. And I've completely misjudged things, so we've only got a few minutes left, and we haven't mentioned the SNP yet. I'm just going to drop in. Alba is fielding 20 candidates in Scotland at the general election, but the SNP. John Swinney was campaigning in Alistair Jack's constituency today of Dumfries and Galloway, and he said that the SNP will stand shoulder to shoulder with WASPy women. The SNP's Richard Arkless missed out on that seat the last time around, and he got 21,000 votes compared to Alistair Jack's 22,600. So it's not that big a majority. I'm thinking, I don't know if you caught Mr. Swinney's programme for government last week, and his four priorities for his government are going to be eradicating child poverty, growing the economy, tackling the climate emergency, and improving public services. Do you think that's more or less going to look like the SNP campaign going forward?
Well, I was thinking about this, and there are plenty Westminster issues relevant to Scotland that we should be campaigning on. And these are issues that are devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And the Scottish government's record is not the place, although the mainstream media would like it, it's not the record of the Scottish government that's at stake in this election. It's a case of sending a big cohort of SNP MPs to continue to provide the opposition to the government that's in Westminster when it's ignoring Scotland or doing things that are actively detrimental to Scotland. And I think there are lots of issues that the SNP should be concentrating on that are affecting people's lives just now. For example, the complete nonsense that is Ofgem at the moment in terms of um, energy generation in Scotland, that goes to England and upsets people's lives with massive transmission pylons for which they get no benefit, or the energy that we are generating in Scotland, but still we're paying the highest prices for our energy. So I hope that the SNP concentrate on issues that are relevant to people in Scotland, but are the reserved issues of the Westminster government. Like the post office. Marion Fellows, the SNP MP for Motherwell, has been leading the whole of the opposition on this. Alison Thulis has been the main protagonist against the two-child limit for the whole of the opposition, and there are other SNP MPs that are doing the same. So more of people like that in an bigger SNP group going to Westminster is definitely going to make a difference. And you know, we have to remember that the SNP are currently the third party there, and it will take an awful lot of Lib Dem wins in England to make them the third party and take over from the SNP. So it's really important that Scots vote for the SNP.
Thanks, Maureen. Just quickly in the last couple of minutes, and we had Joyce McMillan was one of the guests yesterday on the Full Scottish, and she said, or she predicted that Labour are going to take lumps out of the SNP at this next general election. And I'm just thinking, you mentioned the SNP currently being the third biggest party in Westminster, which means they get questions at PMQs. I don't know. Do you agree with Joyce? And do you think we might lose, or the SNP might lose their questions at PMQs?
Well, both Ian Blackford and Stephen Flynn in their different ways have made a great impression at PMQs, and people listen to them. But even before we were the third party, people did listen to what the SNP were saying at Westminster, and many people, many people in England wish they had a party like the SNP that they could vote for in England. So it's really important that our voice is still heard. Yes, the polls are not looking good for the SNP at the moment, but we're bra fighters when it comes to the election campaign, and we're the people that are maybe not pouring millions of pounds into the election campaign, but we're the ones out with huge cohorts of activists not chapping on doors and putting leaflets through folks' doors, and that can make a big difference.
Thanks, Maureen. And just quickly, you mentioned voters in England wishing they had a party like the SNP. Did you hear? I think I heard a rumour recently that the SNP were actually thinking about, whether they should put stand MPs in England. Or have I made that up, or have I made that up, or do you think if they were to do that, would it be a goer?
No, no, we hear about it at every election, but no, definitely not.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, and again, thank you once again for joining us, Maureen, for this, on this bank holiday weekend, as you say. So, I'm just waiting for the camera to go wide. So there you go. Thank you. Yes. So thank you for joining us again this evening, Maureen, and I hope you enjoy what is left of the bank holiday weekend. But so that is it for this evening. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. You know that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our focus now moves on to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. But thank you once again to Maureen for joining us and for your contributions. Again, most valued. And goodbye, and thank you for watching.